Hi everyone. In this video, I want to look at the language that we use when we're comparing two different percentages. Again, it's kind of tricky and trickier than people realize, and it's important because it's where all the interesting stuff comes up. It's one thing to know that 40.8% of Black households own their own house, but just by itself, it's kind of like, well, what does that tell us? You want a context for it. You want to be able to compare, say, Black household home ownership rates with white household home ownership rates, or the Black household home ownership rates in 2018 with the rates in 2010. So you want to be able to compare percentages, and as with everything having to do with percentages, you've got to be careful with the language that you use, or you can end up saying things that aren't accurate, and you can end up being misled by people presenting examples, arguing in ways that aren't entirely valid. So I want to talk about comparing percentages. Start by having you look at these statistics. The first is one that we've already looked at. 48% of Americans who primarily get their news from social media are ages 18 to 29. We dug into that in the last slide. I'm also looking at Americans who primarily get their news from cable news. A much smaller percentage of them are 18 to 29. And the similar statistics for 30 to 49-year-olds. So there's our facts. And now I have two different statements. A, of Americans who get their news from social media, more are 18 to 29 than are 30 to 49. And B, more 18 to 29-year-olds get their news from social media than from cable news. I'd like you to take a look at these two sentences and our statistics. Decide which of them are true. Are both of them true? Are neither of them true? Are you confused? And give your thoughts on the phone. I wanted to just pull up the pie charts. We've already talked about making a pie chart for the first one. So we have this whole of people who get their news from social media. We've broken it out by age. We have another pie for people who get their news from cable news and broken it out by age. This blue wedge represents the 18 to 29-year-olds. Okay. Taking a look at this one more time, just think about those two statements. Think about whether these pie charts change your answer in any way. So here's my answer. Of Americans who get their news from social media. So that's talking about this pie, this world. We only care about Americans whose news comes from social media. Are more of them 18 to 29 than 30 to 49? Well, this blue wedge, the 18 to 29-year-olds, is certainly bigger than the red wedge, the 30 to 49-year-olds. And these wedges are out of the same hole. So this number, there are more people in this blue wedge than in the red one, because we're comparing a larger percentage of one hole to a smaller percentage of that exact same hole. So yes, this first statement is true. The second statement, however, we don't know. We're comparing this blue wedge, 18 to 29-year-olds among people who get their news from social media, with this much smaller looking blue wedge of 18 to 29-year-olds among people who get their news from cable news. And this wedge is certainly smaller than that one, but we don't know the relative sizes of the two pies. We don't know how many people get their news from social media versus cable news, and without knowing that, we can't say whether there are more, just going through and counting them, more people living in this wedge or in this one. So you can't answer statement B. Summarize, when can you say more? If you want to use more or less, you need to be talking about numbers, about how many people. I'll call it nose counts, like just lining people up and counting them. You either have numbers, or you can be talking about percentages that are out of the same hole. So we'll often use more when we're comparing two different slices out of exactly the same pie chart. And here's really the formula for how to do it. There are more people in the hole in slice one than in slice two. So just as when we're describing a single percentage, you have to be very clear about what's your whole and what's your slice. More people who get their news from social media, that's my whole, are 18 to 29 than are 30 to 49. The thing is, more is honestly often kind of boring. There are more people with a college degree in California than in Massachusetts. Same would be true for graduate degrees, professional degrees, PhDs, medical degrees, masters, all of that. Does that tell you anything about which state is more highly educated? I'd like you to give me your thoughts on on the floor. Okay, you know what? It doesn't. California is the most populous state in the United States. It has many more people than Massachusetts. I think it is over 4 times as many. So yeah, it has more people with a college degree. It has more people with a PhD. It also has more high school dropouts. Just about any group of people you care about, except maybe Patriots fans, there's more of them living in California than in Massachusetts, and that's kind of boring. It isn't really what we want to know. What we want to be doing is comparing the percentage of Californians who have a college degree with the percentage of people from Massachusetts who have a college degree. So we want to comparing wedges out of 2 different pies. Here's the statistics. It turns out that 33.3% of people in California have a college degree, whereas 42.9% of people in Massachusetts do. The wedge is much bigger for Massachusetts than for California. So we can't describe that using more, because California's pie is so much bigger. Instead, we use more likely. People in Massachusetts are more likely to have a college degree than people in California. So more likely, or conversely less likely, is really a formula that allows us to say this percentage of this whole, the percentage of Massachusetts, is larger than the corresponding percentage of a different whole. And that's a comparison that we really often find the most interesting. So you would say people in whole 1 are more likely to be in this slice than people in whole 2. You're comparing the same slice, having a college degree, of 2 different wholes. Again, I'm just going to repeat my description. People in Massachusetts are more likely to have a college degree than people in California. So while we don't know whether it's true that there are more 18 to 29-year-olds who get the news from social media than to get the news from cable TV, we do want to be able to compare these 2 different blue wedges and say, essentially, this wedge is a whole lot bigger than that one. So I'd like you to now write a sentence that compares these 2 wedges correctly and give me your answer on the floor. Again, people in whole 1 are more likely to be in the slice than people in whole 2. People who get their news from social media are more likely to be ages 18 to 29 than people who get their news from cable news. And conversely, people who get the news from cable news are a whole lot more likely to be age 65 and up than people who get their news from social media. So that's this more likely. It almost feels like a trick. It's a technique to allow you to make what are usually the most interesting comparisons. You have to be careful because there's a whole lot of different ways to say more likely. You could say a greater percentage of people from Massachusetts than of people from California have college degrees. That tends to sound a little bit kind of dry and mathsy, but it is accurate. Sometimes you'll say disproportionately. People who get the news from social media are disproportionately younger. Sometimes that's helpful, sometimes it's also a little confusing. And often there's examples that depend on the context. People in Massachusetts tend to be better educated than people in California. Massachusetts has a more highly educated workforce. That is a sneaky, hidden way to say more likely. More popular. If I wanted to say that economics is a more popular major at Harvard than it is at UMass Amherst, I'm not talking about the number of economics majors. I'm talking about the percentage of people at the 2 different schools that major in economics. More common sometimes, more reliable. You get a lot of, there's ways to say more likely, which really depend on the circumstances. In sports, for example, better free throw percentage or batting averages. These are all things that talk about the percentage of time something happened. I just wanted to leave you with one example from the news. This is from August of 2020, from a study looking at death penalty cases and the impact of race in the death penalty. What I found is the biggest impact comes in the race not of the accused, but of the victim. And the description the New York Times chose to use was defendants convicted of killing white people were far more likely to be executed than the killers of Black people. A much greater percentage of them were sentenced to death. So that's the end of this video. I look forward to answering your questions in class. As always, please let me know if you understood this or if you didn't, or if you have any feedback on how these videos are working for you.